Welcome back to Dev Dive Episode 12. I'm your host, Nighthawk, joined by my co-host, Riot Legend Larry, as always, and our very special guest today is Ryan Rigney, aka Riot Cactopus. Ryan, could you tell us what your role is at Riot?
I lead communications for a part of the company that includes League of Legends.
Okay.
I think that's like the most accurate and succinct way to put it.
So what does communications mean at a company like Riot?
The way that I like to put it is it's easy to figure out some of it where we talk to players, but the like highfalutin way to put it is that we build a bridge between devs and players. So we try to help them get their message out to players, and then especially when they're trying to make something that impacts the game, we try to make sure that players understand that. So we'll write a post, or we'll even just sit down with the devs and kind of figure out like what is it that you want to say, right? And maybe the devs go out themselves and do it, whether that's in a message that goes to all of our players, or if it's a really small change, it just comes from the devs themselves. So yeah, it's kind of a weird job because we kind of do everything differently depending on the circumstance. A lot of times we'll write a dev blog, or we'll help with a script for a video like Riot Please, the kinds of things that we put on our YouTube channel. Things like copy words that you see on microsites, we jump in on all that stuff.
So to be a little more specific, what about you and your role? Like how do you contribute to the whole communications?
I came into Riot as a writer, not rioter, but writer, where I was working on things like the League of Legends art book and things like that. And it was really just if we had a page, we needed to fill it with words, I would help figure out what those words should be so that they seemed good. And I would, it was that same kind of thing. Work with the devs. Maybe at one of the old things I worked on was the original League client update, and so there was all these like blogs that would come out twice a week. Now it's funny now because I'm actually working on it again. But it was like updates about what we changed, things like patch notes. I was doing that, but for the client. Now my job's a little different because I'm a people manager. So there's a whole team of people who really do all the good stuff, and I'm in a lot of meetings. I still get to work on stuff, do individual contributor type stuff. Like right now, actually, there's some blogs. There's a blog I'm about to start working on about things we're doing to improve the client. I kind of jump on things that would otherwise fall through the cracks now because the rest of the team like really holds it down and doesn't really necessarily even need my help most of the time. There's like a team of like 7 of us on in the part of the org that I'm in, which it's not a secret. We call it LOL Inc. internally, but it's like it includes Wild Rift and Teamfight Tactics and League PC.
But not Valorant. Valorant has a separate communications team.
Yeah, they totally do. So like Chris Tom, who goes by Pwiff, he leads comms on that game. And yeah, it's sort of now there's so many games, and I feel a lot better being able to talk about it finally after we announced all this stuff last year. We never could talk about it, right? Because a lot of these actually internal like verticals and like divisions have been around for a long, long time. Like I think CTOM moved over to Valorant like 2 years ago, something like that.
Yeah.
And it sounds a little crazy to work on something that long, but like it actually, if you want to do something right, I think it makes sense to have somebody on something like thinking through like how are we really gonna do this thing? How are we gonna launch this thing? What's our messaging? That kind of stuff. So yeah, he's on that one. There's Dylan Buckner. I forget what his like summoner name is, but he's the Legends of Runeterra comms lead. I believe he's still playing that role. And there's a few people who jump in on each different team. And then we've got like Riot Forge coming out. Like that'll be its own team that happens. There's a lot of stuff in the works. And the teams, we like stay in touch, but a lot of times we're kind of off doing our own thing, just like the product teams themselves.
Talking about CTOM and his role internally, it was funny because we knew Valorant was coming up.
Yeah.
They had kind of played it close to the chest, right? R&D. But then as they were getting ready for launch, I kept seeing the messages going out, and I just felt so bad for Tom specifically because because all of a sudden it went from like 0 to 60, and it just kept at 60 for months, and I was like,
Yeah.
oh my goodness.
It still is. It's at like
Yeah.
120 now, right?
Yeah.
Like it's nuts.
Yeah.
Jumping back
Yeah.
just a little bit, I wanted to touch on something because this is something coming from an outsider's perspective that always cracks me up. Everyone in the community really knows Rioters by their Riot summoner name. Like you're Riot Cactopus, Larry's Riot Legend Larry. But Larry continually has ingrained in me that a lot of the internal Rioters don't really even remember what people's summoner names are. They're like, oh yeah, that's Larry, that's Ryan. They're like, oh, what's his summoner name again?
Yeah.
Which always cracks me up.
There's a lot to unpack with that. I mean, if you want to get really deep, it's like, to what extent are you integrated with your Riot identity? You know, like or to what extent is it a separate branch of your identity? Like there was a time where I think I kind of just truly was Cactopus. I think now I've started to distance myself a little bit. And again, there's a lot to unpack, but I think if someone were to repeatedly call me Cactopus in person at the office, I'd be like, dude, you can just Rigney's fine, you know? You can keep it chill. Don't be weird. But there's other people that are totally fine. Like, I don't know. I call David Turley. Just because calling him Freak seems so wrong, but lots of people call him Freak, you know, and I don't think that bothers him at all. Or Rivington, right?
Yeah.
Everybody says Riv, but that one is like a little easier because the name is similar. Cactopus is like a really upsetting word to begin with, so I don't want to be in a meeting and have someone say that repeatedly. I don't know. It's you could go deep on that one. The
HR department. The HR department calls you. They're like, "Hey, Cactopus, could you come in here for a minute?" You've had some complaints.
Yeah, I'd be like, "Am I in trouble?"
Yeah. I was just thinking that. I'm like, if someone said, "Will Legend Larry please come to the office?" I'm like, I don't know if this is a joke or if it's like serious. Like it's
yeah. Okay, I'll give you one anecdote, which is that there are certain members of like the leadership team that I'm pretty familiar with, but our CEO, I didn't really get to know him until last year. And we were working on like the 10-year anniversary thing, and I'd probably been in like a dozen meetings with him, and someone referred to me as Cactopus, and he was like, "You're Cactopus?" And I was like, what is happening? So yeah, it causes weird situations at the office.
I feel like it might be that the more in the community focus you are, the less chance you are to be sort of pinioned into your summoner name. Because like if you said David Turney or Turley, people would know
Nobody
that you're
knows
talking
who
about
that
Freak.
is.
Most people would know you're talking about Freak. But maybe is that why you're rebranding your Twitter a little bit? You're going away from the
that's always been my Twitter. That's like a Twitter that I had, you know, even before I started at Riot. I'll always use the Cactopus on Reddit because that was really like where I started to publicly use that name a lot. I don't know. I try not to overthink it. I think a lot of times when I'm talking to players, it's okay to be Cactopus. But I guess if I'm being honest, if I'm talking to my coworkers, I'd rather just be Ryan. Like if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It makes me more comfortable.
Okay, so that was a bit of a tangent, but those are
totally
common on the show. Kind of getting back to what we were talking about. How do other teams, not specifically communications related, interact with the comms team?
The good thing about working on the team that I'm on is that we get to work really closely with product. And like to me, I think the reason people play is because of the game. Even I think there's a lot of things that I get to work on that I feel are important and like valuable, but I don't think that anything I do is the reason people play, right? And so my perspective is, if I want to have a really big impact, what I want to do is enable the product people to like make a better product. And so I feel like I feel like I'm playing a support role, and I like that, right? Like I'm super happy in that. Like if I can, like I'm gonna have a meeting with Andre, who's Meddler, right? Like later today. He values my opinion on what do you think? Will this resonate? That kind of thing, and it drives his thinking about, well, oh, we could make a product tweak that is more in line with whatever what we think players want. That stuff it feels really good. So it's like a really close working relationship with him, like in meetings all the time. And we're not just like we're not like, oh, here's what I think the players will like. It's not just that. It's sort of like honestly, when we do stuff, we think about how we're gonna say it to players, right? As part of it, and I get to help with that part. Um, does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so.
It's kind of vague, but it's kind of hard to explain unless you've been in like a bunch of like corporate meetings where you like are trying to add value, which is like a really weird. It's like a really weird
I,
process.
I mean, the idea of like a communications team, it's really hard to, in my opinion, it's really hard to nail down because when people think, communications, oh, it's talking, oh, it's
Hmm.
sharing information, but there's so much, and I would love to hear more your thoughts about this. There's so much more when it comes to communicating with someone than just saying a bunch of words. And it sounds like
Yeah,
you touched on it a little bit with you were
yeah,
talking about working with Andre here soon.
right. I think like what okay, so like one thing that I'll do when I come in on like to work on like a product. I'll give you an example. Like we started talking about a month ago about how hey, we'd like to do some more stuff to address like disruptive behavior in the game. There's a kind of a moment where especially I think really Voyboy did kick it off where uh, he kind of raised the fact that it's still a problem that Riot should be looking into more, right? And I think a lot of Rioters looked at that and said it's not like this was news to us, right? Like we know that it's an ongoing it's a 10-year-old game, right? And it's always been one of the challenges. Um, but I think there was an increased interest in like, well, what can we do? Let's take a like fresh eyes. Let's take a fresh approach to this old problem. And so one of the things that I do is like I come in and I'm just the comms guy on the team, right? The product people are figuring out like what are some like are there some of these things that are like sacred cows that we could look at differently? Like for instance, for a long time we've said that we don't um we we really feel like we've reached our limit in terms of what we can do to stop inters because the risk is if you tune up your int detection algorithms too high, then what you'll start doing is start banning people who just had a bad game, right? Like that's a guaranteed thing. It's not there's nobody with any technology that could figure out a way to avoid that, right? Where you're just especially automatically, right? Like cuz we are talking about automatic solutions. If we had enough money to hire yeah, I mean, it would be like an entire country of player support people to manually just ban people who are griefing in game and review all the games, right? So we've always said, we want to find like automatic solutions to the stuff, but we're scared of going too hard and accidentally getting some people who are just having a bad game. So the product people now are saying, well, what if we just try some stuff, right? What if we try tuning it up a little more aggressively, experiment with it, and try it out? So then they go, how do we tell that to players? Because they're nervous, right? They're like, we don't want to, we want this to come across right. Because what we're saying is we're willing to experiment and try something a little more aggressive than we have in the past. And so what I'll do for them is say, here's what I think it would look like if you wanted to message that to players. And I'll sometimes I'll just write a draft from scratch. When I'm working with Andre, he's really good. So a lot of times he'll go, here's my draft. Rigney, give me your notes on it. And that works great. Like that's fine. I think a lot of times devs like the devs at least at Riot really really care about not only doing the right thing for the game but they want to be understood, right? I mean, which is like a pretty basic human emotion. So when they're thinking about what they're going to do, I always see them thinking through how will I then say that, and I try to just make that part less worrisome where I go, well, here's one way to say it and show them a draft, right? And then they go, oh, that seems fine. Like I thought it would be horrible. Because they worry about how are things going to come across. Um, so that's actually a really specific example of something recently, which I don't even remember what your question was, but I think I addressed
No,
that.
no, it's
No,
perfectly
no,
fine. This happens every
yeah,
single episode. The questions are more of just like a how do we start the conversation flowing
yeah,
Yeah,
and keep it from being just like
yeah,
robot. Like how do you do this?
yeah,
How
yeah.
do you do that?
yeah, yeah.
There's no problem getting off topic or anything like that.
Well, I
Cool.
mean, that's an eventuality with me. Talking about communication, there's one of the things we learned at Riot, or one of the things I learned at Riot was the idea of a communication um, structure like triangled, like pyramid versus the inverse. And what that means is when you start into a topic or start a conversation, you either get to the point that's like, a logical,
Oh,
here's my
yeah.
conclusion, and then here's everything that backs it up. Um, I'm the opposite. I start with all the context and I go into like a story thing, and then I
Right.
get to my point. The problem is I lose people as I go through my context.
Yeah.
So you'll see
So
that a lot.
that's a real thing. So what you're talking about, like it has different names, but like I learned about. I went to journalism school,
Mm,
right? So they called it like the story pyramid, and it's
mm.
like it's the idea of you put at the top of your story. Look, here's what happened. All right, so and so did something. Boom, a little more detail, a little more detail, and then by the time you get to the bottom, it's all the granular detail that people who are really engaged are going to find. I definitely find that when I work with devs, the thing that they default to is let me give you a context dump about
Mhm.
our values and like all this stuff, and you're like, hey, I'm reading it, and I'm like 800 words in, and then they're like, and so we're changing the number of tokens you get from missions, and it's like, hold on. So like honestly, here's the thing. I actually think that it's okay to have a bunch of different voices coming from one company, which is not something everybody would agree with. Some people think that like you should have one consistent brand voice. At Riot, I think it's okay. I think the thing that I want to emphasize more is that like devs are communicating in an authentic way. So I'm okay with devs like taking like if they hand me a draft like that, I'm not going to tear it completely apart. What I'll do is I'll say, all right, compromise with me on this one. Put a TLDR at the top where you
Yeah.
just summarize what you're doing, right? And then you can still do like if you want to pour your heart and soul out about this token change, like man, I'm here for it. Like, let's do it. That's fine.
Yeah. I've
Yeah,
invented my I've maybe not invented, it's not the right word. I have I don't know, created my own shape in my mind, a paradigm. I think of it as a kite where I'm like, okay, I've made my point, and then I broaden out, and then I try and get back
that
to
is kind of the TLDR one is
yeah,
kind of
right.
like that. Right? Like, listen, tokens are changing, and then just read on, and then it's like, and it's like the whole history of tokens,
Yep.
and like, because there are people that are reading that and going, like they're eating it up. They're just like, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The philosophy of tokens has been this. Tell me about the whole history of this change, dude.
Yeah.
Because it's a 10-year-old game. You can talk. You can talk for 10,000 words about anything that we do at this point.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
that's sort of like the core audience of, or at least the eventual core audience of this show is the people who are really fascinated by like the inner workings of companies like Riot, where some people are always just going to sit at the bottom and they're just going to play the game, and that's fine. Like they're just there to play
right.
the game. But some people really want to get ingrained in the culture. They want to figure out what makes the gears turn, what's the secret sauce that makes League of Legends or whatever game so good. And that's kind of like not in as many words, but the synopsis of what Dev Dive is supposed to be, which is awesome to hear that people are actually interested in something like that.
Yeah,
It's
So,
it's kind of like
um,
a bad way of saying it is seeing how the sausage,
right.
but that's normally a bad connotation, but this is supposed to be a good one.
Because the
You
idea
know
is that
what?
sausage is horrifying, and you don't want to
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
I think that's true about game development, though. Like, it
Yeah.
definitely isn't clean, and it's like a kind of messy process. I don't know. It's not. Hopefully, you don't think that sausage is disgusting after you find out about it.
Right?
I
Yeah.
still eat sausage. Um,
Delicious.
yeah, delicious.
it's like there's a feeling that if you're gonna eat meat, you should be familiar with like how it's being processed or how it's being treated when it's alive. So I think we should start a movement that if you're gonna criticize a game developer, that you have to develop a game
Uh,
first, and then
oh my
Ooh.
god, man.
then you can
Oh,
criticize the game developer.
oh.
Whew.
I mean, on one hand, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. On the other hand, that's a lot of work.
I mean, I've still not made a game. I've been working in the games industry for 5 years. I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. So I think I'd be disqualified too. I've seen other people make games,
Yeah,
but
exactly. I've watched a game get made. Does that count?
yeah, I've written some good
Or
posts, but
Optimus.
I don't know.
All right, so sort of tangenting on what we were talking about a little bit ago, sort of out of order, what I wanted to say, but Riot actually has a fairly unique policy on allowing regular employees like Larry or somebody not in the comms department to make public addresses about something that they're working on. How does that affect your job?
It's a policy that I am really in favor of because I think that devs that are really in touch with players wind up making smarter decisions over the long term. And they tend to be a little more responsive to like feedback when they get it. If they can get emotionally invested in it, it's a challenging policy too. Like it comes with a lot of risks. For me, I just try to support devs while they're engaging. Like a lot of times, I will say, instead of actually just talking, one to one to players, maybe this is something that could go broader, right? So then we'll help figure out like a channel that they can put it out on. But and then sometimes it's just like people are like, hey, I want to talk on Twitter about this thing with some players. Like, can you, does this message look okay to you? And I just give them advice or whatever feedback. Try not to be like a blocker, but like basically like someone that can help make things less scary, because like it can also be pretty terrifying to talk to players on the internet. So yeah, I'm just trying to facilitate it basically.
Yeah, we've seen a couple of times instances where it can blow up in the developers' faces, and I'm sure that's never a situation anyone wants to be in.
Yeah, for sure. And most people, like, they just want to talk to players because they're excited about the thing that they're working on, right? So it's, if you can make that possible in a way that's like safe, then I feel really good about that. So yeah, I try to help in that way, play support. And there's actually a number of people on the team that play that role, across the org.
So, what is something that made you, when you got into this role, that made you think this is the job that I want to do?
Huh. I always just liked writing and I liked video games. And so this is kind of that, right? It's kind of uniting those two things. Um, I used to write about games for magazines. Like I wrote the first ones were like I would write for like websites, that's when I started out when I was younger. And then I had a gig with Game Pro magazine and kind of worked my way up, did some stuff with PC Gamer. And then I was with Wired for a couple of years. I thought that I was going to go into like that, right? Like writing about games for magazines. And it wasn't really like just game reviews, although I did my share of that. Like I really liked the journalism side of it, which is like finding a story and like interviewing a bunch of people. So I went to school for journalism and all that stuff. And then I found out that you can't really get paid to do that. Like there's like not really a market. And I mean, this was like when I graduate, like I mean early 2010s. Like the market was already it was falling apart then. And it's really rough now. There's just like, I think there's room for like a few kind of like celebrity, like journalists who do really great work and like have book deals and stuff. But like there's not that many, right? You can kind of count on just a few hands how many people are really making a really great living in that. And so, but video games are always a thing. And so actually the second games industry job that I took was at Riot, and I kind of fell into doing the communications work there, and just it really scratches a lot of the same itches basically. Um, yeah, so I love my job. I don't know. I have a blast doing it. It is kind of felt just like a continuation of that thing that I was doing before.
To pick up on a point, because one of the things that that we try to cover here is that initial, like, that start. A lot of people say, how did you start doing this? And a lot of times it's like, oh well, I did the thing. And that's always, I mean, it's as simple as it is, it's also the hardest to kind of build upon, especially when someone goes, I don't know what that means. So picking up on what you said, it's like, oh, I started to write on websites. How did you go about that? Like, I'm assuming you were in high school or early stages of college. Like, what
Yeah,
led
yeah.
you to that path specific?
Yeah. I actually started. I would just lie about my age and send pitches to magazines like crazy. So like I was like 15, I think, when I started doing that. But I would send a pitch and I would just like pretend I wouldn't say anything. But if they ever asked, I'd be like, yeah, I'm in my 20s and I'm like a journalist. Like that super worked, and I've never felt an ounce of guilt about that at all. Like, if the writing was good enough for them, like why
Yeah.
hamstring myself by admitting that I was like 16 or whatever. So
All right.
yeah,
All right.
I did that
All right.
with GameSpot and oh no, Game Pro in particular, and I actually I admitted that to the guy who was like my editor like years later,
Yeah.
and he was like, I kind of wondered, but yeah.
The 10-year sting operation is over. We got him, boys.
Yeah,
Bring
yeah,
in
yeah.
bring in the
Bring it in. Bring it in.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess that's my advice for kids is just don't use the anonymity of the
Yeah.
internet to
Yeah.
just try
Yeah.
to get your work out there. That's can't hurt, right?
And yeah, and I gotta ask, how like rough, how many times did you send a pitch to a magazine before you got one to be like, yeah, well, like let's work with it.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean hundreds, and it was like it's not like when you read about people who get into like book publishing,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, oh, they got rejected 100 times and then they finally got their deal and now they get deals constantly. Like when I was doing freelance writing, that's not how it works. The way it works is you get rejected 5 times a day, every day, and 1 out of every 10 you get accepted because you're constantly trying to do one story over here with this outlet and one over here with this one. And most of them are ignoring you. Like, so I got like, yeah, hundreds of rejections, but the thing that wound up working for me was that I found a niche.
Mm-hmm.
So and this is like advice that just really doesn't apply because I have no idea how the like media publishing space works now. Like
Sure.
I don't think you can do this anymore, but like at the time there was the iPhone had just come out basically. Like the App Store had just come out. So the iPhone had been out for a couple of years, the App Store had just come out. And I realized that there was like no competition to write about these games. Literally, no one was writing about them. No one gave a damn, basically. And like people who really cared about games were like they wanted to write about the new Zelda game, right? Like they didn't
Mhm.
have any aspirations to write about Doodle Jump. Um,
Please
so
tell me
for
that was something you wrote. You wrote about something
oh
called Doodle.
oh yeah, Doodle Jump, dude, it's a
Okay,
classic. It's
I'm gonna
actually
look that up.
that game is one of the best iPhone games ever, and it's still in like the top 200 on the charts, like 11 years later.
Wow. All right.
It's made by this dude named Igor from like Poland, and he's like a super millionaire now because he made like a 99-cent app called Doodle Jump. But like, so I started writing my iPhone games, and I
Mhm.
I started writing for some blogs that paid like $25 an article. Like I would
Hmm.
just pitch them, right? And they were like, yeah, sure, no one else wants to write about these. I think what one of my early claims to fame is that I published the first ever review of Angry Birds because it was like
Oh,
2009. Yeah,
wow. Okay.
and if you look that up, you probably won't be able to find it. But it's like garbage, Like I wrote it like whatever, like 11 years ago. And so then I kind of had this niche, and then as iPhone gaming got more and more popular, there was like more and more interest from like more mainstream publications who were like, "Yeah, we need a guy that can do the phone games or whatever." Or like, the iPad came out, and they're like, "Can somebody write about like the top 20 iPad games?" Right? And so then I would come in and like pitch that and be like, "Look, I know about all the games." Uh, and yeah, it kind of worked out that way.
Okay.
I
Okay.
found it, by the way.
Oh,
Okay.
Christ.
Find Doodle Jump, or did you find the review,
I
or
found the Mac
both?
Stories interview with Ryan Rigney, the author of
No,
Buttonless.
delete that. Delete that. So that was actually cool. Like that was like the real career jump was
Mhm.
I started pitching like a book deal idea of like let me write a book that's about the best iPhone games so far and the stories behind them.
Hmm.
Um and so I like interviewed all the people who'd basically anyone who'd made a decent iPhone game at that point, which was like 2011. I just call them up and be like, "Hey, do you want to talk for this book?" And all of them said yes because like no one else was interested in talking to them.
Yeah.
Um, and did it was like small press, like a fun little book about iPhone games. That was the early career moves that I think led to me pretty directly being able to show that I'd put in the work and had a resume worth looking at to apply to a place like Riot.
So you are a published author.
Yeah, but it's like I don't they never paid me anything past the advance. Like it didn't didn't actually make any money or anything like that. I don't
Well,
know.
I'll
Anybody
I'm
who
a,
self-publishes now probably gets more readers than that book did.
well, I mean, I'll say it like you've done something that most people have not done, which is publish a book. So
Yeah.
you've written a book. Like that's
Do
No,
you
case
have
in
a
it's
point.
cool.
copy of it
Yeah,
still?
it was cool. What was
Oh
that?
yeah, did they at least give you a copy?
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. They sent me like 10 and then they also had it translated into Korean for some reason. And so I
Okay.
have hold on.
Oh
He's
no.
gonna bring it out. He's gonna get the book.
Oh
There it is.
yes,
Is my
that's
name in it?
amazing.
No, my name's not in English. They rendered my name in Korean, I guess.
Yeah,
For
Pretty
for
good.
audio
that's
listeners, Ryan
awesome.
has brought out
Pretty
a
good.
book that he wrote and published about iPhone games. It looks awesome.
That was translated for some reason into Korean.
Into
I don't
Korea.
know why. And they published it like 4 years later in Korea. So there was a lot of really confused Korean kids being like, the original Angry Birds though? Like, because it was like they were on 3 by that point.
Yeah.
All
That's a
right,
great
coming
story,
off
by the
of
way.
that tangent, that was a great story. That
That's a
might
great
rank up
story.
there as the best story ever told on Dev Dive
Oh no.
so
I
far.
apologize for that.
Says a lot about the show. All right. So, what skills as a communicator would you think are important for somebody in communications to succeed?
So like the big one that is like it sounds super corporate and like buzzwordy, but I actually think it's like knowing and understanding your audience. Um, like most of the mistakes that I see get made are by someone who they didn't understand how the person they were talking to would react to the language that they're choosing to use. And that's just like it applies way beyond games. You know, it's like you see a politician who says something that you're like everyone in the crowd it like rubs them the wrong way, that kind of thing. It's all about knowing your audience. Um, so on League, like I think the main thing is people. I think it's really important for people who work in communications to have a pretty good understanding of the game and to play the game so that they can like empathize and understand like with what would matter to someone who plays it. But then also like honestly, I learned a lot about how the League audience talks just by like really obsessively reading everything that I could find that was being said about it online. And so I wasn't just Reddit, but it was like the boards too, and like Twitter and like whatever else. And just if you do that enough, if you subject yourself to that, you start to see some like pretty clear patterns and like even like values about like what people want. And so you start to understand how much people just want you to tell them really clearly what you're changing about the game, right? They don't want anything to be hidden. There's some to some extent they would like their feedback to be heard, but I think more importantly than that, they would just like to have the sense that the devs are working on the right things. Even if it's not what they necessarily would prioritize. So
Mhm.
it's that kind of stuff you can only really figure out once you kind of build an understanding of the audience you're talking to. So if you go work on another game, then you gotta do it all over. You gotta like figure out because it's probably a totally different type of player and totally different audience depending on what you're moving to. Um, yeah,
Yeah. And it can't be stressed enough how important it is to diversify your platforms that you're looking at. And I actually had this as a talking point that I want to talk about later, but might as well bring it up now. A lot of people look at Reddit and Reddit like platforms as like the gold standard of like this is where communities are going to be formed. This is where all the game discussion is going to be happening. Blah 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 blah. And it's so easy to get caught in that bubble
hmm
of Reddit and Reddit platforms
yeah,
where
yeah,
you get sucked into the hole and you're like this is the only important discussion that is happening about this topic. Um, when in reality, even though Reddit is one of the top 10 traffic sites in the world, it still is it's not the majority. And even if it is the majority, it's not everybody. So it's important to go out and
yeah.
see what people are saying on different platforms just because it is wildly different. Like if you go to Reddit, you'll have a hot take that gets 10,000 upvotes on there. And then you'll go
Yeah,
to some other platform, Reddit or Facebook or Twitter or something, and people will just have the complete opposite opinion.
totally. I think too, like, um, it's a very like day to day kind of short term mentality. Like this thread was upvoted yesterday.
Mm.
It doesn't really tell you anything about like long term what's going to make this game last like years. Although a lot of times like you'll see people being upvoted for saying like the game will die if it doesn't get this specific change. And that happens every game. I think it can be pretty tough and it takes a lot of like guts from developers to like look at everything because there'll be like a million different competing messages basically saying the same thing. This thing has to be the number one priority, and then pick what the real priority is. Yeah, it's pretty tough, but it definitely isn't just based on whatever was upvoted yesterday.
That's actually really interesting. Where point to ask is when you do look for what would be your suggestion to people who are like, yeah, I wanna learn about a player base. I don't want to get caught in that trap of an echo chamber or like the
Mhm.
day-to-day mentality. Where would you go, or how would you go about finding those information points?
Man, I mean, I did it once because I went and worked on PUBG for a little while, right? So I was
Mm.
like, I have to learn about this. That one was easier though for me because I'd put like, well over 100 hours into the game, so I already had that
Oh,
baseline. Yeah, like
right.
I was like obsessed. Um, and so I I had to rely on what I could find, and that game was actually really built around streaming a lot more. It seemed
Hmm.
like to me, like it seemed like dominated by kind of streamer personality. So in League it's pretty often that there's like a streamer with a hot take, but at the time it was like there was a few voices who like really were upset about a couple issues. And
Mhm.
so then and whatever, there was a few problems, like there was a lot of bugs in PUBG in the beginning, obviously, right? Because it was like this totally new game.
Yeah.
um and so I think the process then is like, okay, it does seem like this general theme of bugs is the problem. Then how do you dig into like which are the ones that are like really problematic, like that are the most frustrating? And that just takes a combination of like, yes, seeing what people are saying, but then also like kind of using gut judgment to look at like, okay, which of these should we just start fixing right now? Yeah, I think you just have to slowly break things down into chunks and then help the devs figure out like what matters based on that. Like, because they look at it a lot of times, you can say bugs, and they'll be like, well, what is it just the vehicle flipping thing? Because like we can spend a long time on that, like
Yeah.
that was the thing in PUBG. Um, and I don't know. It's important to try to like break things down. And a lot of times, honestly, I do think sometimes I don't do this too much now, but sometimes it can be useful to go out and be like the one person who goes into the community and goes, "Can you clarify? Like, is it this?" And then see what people say.
Mm.
And that can be helpful sometimes too. I've played that role definitely on Reddit at times when I felt like I just didn't understand what the like or I felt like there was something needed to be disambiguated. And I like always encourage. I think that's a lot of what Riot does do naturally is go out and be like, "What do you think about this? Is it this? Is it this? Right?" Like people say Wukong's busted, but it's like let's get more specific than that.
Mhm.
And I think devs are pretty well equipped to like really dig in on that kind of thing.
Cool.
So what is something that you personally struggle with in the communications role? And I'll share an example of mine just so
Yeah.
um, everyone has to share one. That's the rule.
Okay.
So me, I'm a moderator of many Reddit communities. So something that I personally struggle with is I struggle with empathizing with the user who comes in and just spews toxicity and spews very angry vitriol at me. Like they come in and say, "Hey, you're what's wrong with this website? You're ruining it for everybody. Nobody wants you here." Blah 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 blah. I have a hard time sitting down and being like, "Okay, but what's the message behind that? Why is he upset?"
Yeah. Um, that one's tough. That one, I mean, there's so many personal instances that I like relate to that really hard, and so it's hard for me to even think of any other one because that's such a broad one of just like people having trouble expressing themselves in like a non-inflammatory way. Um, the easiest thing to do is just kind of leave the situation and disconnect, right? But that's not always the most productive. I've found that's I mean I hate to steal your answer, but it's something that I'm struggling with too. But I also like I it applies to my personal life, right? And like working
Mhm.
with coworkers because I think a lot of times people will express themselves, especially over writing, in a way that is like weirdly passive aggressive and or kind of accusatory in some small way. And I've found the thing that I've been finding over the last couple of years, and I've been really trying to like grow in relation to this, is if you give people like the benefit of the doubt and just try to get them to restate what they really mean, or and one way to do this is to say, did you mean this? Is this the thing that you're concerned about? Like in a really sincere, not at all, you don't send that energy back at them. But if you go, so you're saying this, right? I find that so many times, not every time, not I don't know what the ratio is, but so many times people will come back and be like, "Yeah, that's actually what I mean." And then it's like their whole tone is shifted because you're just showing them that you respect them enough to try to figure out what they really mean instead of like engaging with whatever shit they threw at you.
Mm.
Um, it definitely applies to talking to players, but like man, I found that to be like talking to other adults, coworkers, that kind of thing. It's like really, really valuable there too. It's something that I'm still not perfect at, but I'm by a long shot, but I'm trying to get better at. I feel like I stole your
Yeah.
answer, but
No, no,
I just
I
it
think that
resonates with me.
that was a pretty wide answer I gave anyway. I feel like that's probably one of the hardest things for anyone who deals with
Yeah.
people who are angry at them a lot. Oh, we lost Larry.
Uh oh. Goodbye, Larry.
Something that was I wanted to focus on was when you were talking about communicating with people over text, and sometimes you lose the sort of tone of the conversation in that medium. And when I was younger, I was fully on board the text only train. I'm like, no, there's no reason to ever call anyone. There's no reason to ever communicate through voice. Text is the perfect
Yeah.
medium. I was a really fast typer at the time. I've actually lost some typing speed over the years. But I was like, yeah, texting, it's fully superior to voice in every way. But the older I got and the more situations that I got into, like where you said where tone can get miscommunicated very easily over text, I'm like, okay, this is why the voice format exists. This is why people still need to get into calls, or if possible, get into person to person conversation, because you can just lose so much context and so much personality just over that text.
Right.
Like I've talked to so many of my friends who are just not great text communicators, and they'll spark debates and arguments and conversations totally unintentionally, just because of that disconnect between the two mediums.
Yeah. I personally feel that I am way more effective talking to someone in person than I am over text, which is crazy to say as someone who's like paid to communicate over text primarily. I don't I feel that I just am not good enough to be able to be taken to like transmit my meaning 100% accurately over text, like almost ever, because even things like format sends a message, right? Like if you write to someone an email that is really long, it's like 2,000 words long, there's already a weird tonal thing happening there, which is that you are monologuing at someone. If I have a lot to say to someone and I go up to them and I'm going to have about 2,000 words worth of stuff to say, I can do so many things in person that prepares them for that in a way that lets them know that they're being respected, right? That isn't just like, hey, listen here, sit down. I'm about to rant at you for an hour. What I'll do is be like, hey, man, there's this problem that it's super complex. So let me just give you the rundown, like here to right, and then I'll do all that. I can do that in text, but even just being hit with an email that long feels like threatening. You know what I mean? Like text it comes with all these weird. There's all this meaning associated with each sentence you write that isn't even in the words. It's in other things like the format and the length, that kind of thing. So
The
yeah,
period at the end. If you put a period at the end, are you
yeah. What
being
does that mean?
angry?
Yeah,
Are you being
yeah,
definitive? Or is it just being
yeah.
proper punctuation? It's terrifying. It's
We
a
have way
terrifying
more.
medium to communicate it.
We have way more tones like that we use or inflections that we use than we do punctuation marks. Could we have like 3
Well, that's why
punctuation
that
marks?
is the literal reason why emojis exist, to
Right, it is.
translate
Yeah.
tones of conversation into text. And that's
But
like,
you send a work email with a bunch of emojis in
yeah,
it,
no,
and you're
it
like,
doesn't
"Am
work.
I being?"
It doesn't work in the business yet.
The only people I know who send emojis in work emails are actually being passive aggressive as all hell.
Oh no.
Like, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's like the
Well, I
opposite of
mean,
what they're feeling. They'll send the
they can be
smiley face.
used to translate passive aggressiveness.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, the smile emoji can be taken very many ways. I think
Totally.
Slack is
That's why
a great way to communicate with people, because it's like you get to use those emojis in a less threatening situation where you can. It's not like a email. I think email is like the. I don't like email personally. I think
Yeah.
it leaves no room for rebuttal in any meaningful way.
Right.
I mean, it has its place in the communications world, but wow,
just to chime, that's
we tangented off to emojis and email pretty hard.
I was gonna say
Um,
just to throw my 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 communication style in there. I like to communicate in GIFs. Just primarily, like I try to.
Just primarily.
Okay,
I
first
try
of
not
all,
to
let me
use
stop you.
words.
Let me stop you right
Yeah.
there. I'm gonna roll back the clock about 10 seconds.
Sorry,
You communicate via excuse me, what?
GIFs.
Oh no, we're not going that tangent. No,
Okay.
he can say it the way he wants to say it. I don't like it. I don't endorse it, but we're not doing it. I refuse.
All right, just I
Um,
threw I like all right, I panicked and I said GIFs. I use Giphy. All right, so I do say GIFs. I just panicked. All right, I'm sorry.
I don't
I'm
believe that
sorry,
for one
Larry.
second.
You are the weakest link. You're being kicked off the show. No, but I think emojis or sorry, GIFs are really just a like the next level of emojis. It's just like what's a GIF but a more expressive way to show emotion. Like you could either have a little
mean-
guy with like a smiley face and his tongue sticking out, or you could have Taylor Swift's with the smiley face and her tongue sticking out. I don't know.
Wait,
My
is that
my
it?
mother definitely feels more comfortable expressing herself with GIFs than with words at this point. And our text messages, that's all I get from her. It's kind of really weird.
All right. Coming back to the very concrete talking points that we're on. What is something that being in this role has taught you about the rest of the world? So like not in a non-job related thing.
About the rest of the world.
Yeah, for
Damn,
example,
man,
like
that's kind of deep.
It's intense,
what have
man.
you learned in communications that you can apply to just like day-to-day life?
I think I was under the misapprehension for a long time that about how communication worked with other people. Like I was like fundamentally confused and um I saw things, especially when I was in like high school, I saw things as like I like to debate with people over things and like dig into the meaning of what they said and say, well, you said this, but it really means this. Um, I don't think communication is really about the words you use so much as it is um, about the meaning that you're trying to communicate, which sounds really obvious, but what it's done to me is that I've changed in a fundamental way in the last few years, and I think it's because of this job, which is that like when I look at a sentence that someone sends me that's written down, I don't worry too much about the words in it so much as I'm thinking to myself, what is it that they're trying to get across to me, right? I don't get hung up on individual word choices or like even implications of things that they said. I'm trying to figure out based on my what I know about this person and what the context and where they're coming from, like what is it that they're really trying to get across. And so a lot of times I've become more skeptical of my ability to accurately understand what someone's saying the first time they say it. A lot of times you get it right, but a lot of times I'm more likely now than I ever have been before to like ask a clarifying question or to like pick out something like, is this what you mean, right? And I think what I've basically the real takeaway is that everybody is pretty bad at communicating. Like everybody tries their best, but like everybody's really bad. Like they're almost never saying the exact thing that they really would like to be able to say. It's so hard to find the words to express what you're really feeling. And most people never are able to. And so if you give people that benefit of the doubt, I think you take a very different approach to anything that's said to you. Like almost anything. Um, I don't know. Maybe that's just part of getting older and getting more tolerant of just everybody, right? But I definitely feel that working in the role that I have has like kind of accelerated that perspective change.
Yeah. When I was younger, I had a worldview that was very interesting where I thought that everybody's mind was made up about whatever. And it's sort of true, but I thought that there was no real way to convince anyone of anything if they had a thought. Like if they wanted to do something or if they wanted to
Uh-huh.
be a certain person, like nobody could convince them otherwise. And that's just sort of
Right.
how like I lived growing up. Then I'm like, okay, I do realize now that you can talk to people and you can change their viewpoints, but
Yeah.
it's something that was reinforced so heavily by the people that I was around, where you would get in a conversation with them and you try to change their mind or discuss something, and you're just like, okay, they're not going to change no matter what, and I'm not going to change. I'm sure as hell not going to change my mind.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I'm sure a lot of people have basically the same delusion, right? That like I don't know.
Thank
It
you.
definitely seems
Put it
that
nicely.
way.
Yeah, to put it nicely.
I mean, sure. I don't know. I guess I never thought that same thing, but I know what you mean when you say that, which is it's really interesting. I think one thing that might lead into that is that people they think that for instance, that people only change their mind based on facts or something, and so they'll just repeatedly try to use facts to change somebody's mind, and it just doesn't work, right? And actually, people are way more complicated than that. Like a lot of times, all it takes to change somebody's mind is to just show them that you respect them and that you're listening to them and that you're worth listening to, and that's the thing that opens their mind and their heart
Yeah.
to what you're saying. And so, yeah, if you go through life thinking that people believe things based entirely on facts, yeah, you could just go your whole life being like, people never change their mind for anything. Yeah, that's super interesting.
I thought it was really poignant. You saying like we're not very good at it at communicating. Like we never get to say what we're actually feeling or what we're
Yeah,
actually trying. And
right.
you'll see it through, and like even in this short hour, I will stumble over a word because I'm like, there's
Yeah.
a specific word I'm trying to find it, and then to go even one step deeper, I actually I'm not very good with articulating my emotions. I never went through that whole process growing up of like, this is how I feel and this is why I
Right.
feel it.
Right.
So I have four primary emotions that I feel, and everything I feel like sits in those.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
when someone's like, "Why are you so mad?" I don't know. So that makes it even more difficult, right, to try and tell someone and communicate that. So I thought that
Yeah.
was really poignant. Yeah.
I think we all struggle with it, man. And it's something that I don't know if anybody's really mastered it. A thing that I started doing with my wife recently, like she and I communicate pretty well with each other, like
Hmm.
really, really well. It's something we value a lot. But there have been times where like you're upset about something, right? Something's happened and you just don't know what to say. And I started trying this thing recently. I've only done it a couple times, but where I said to her something to the effect of like, I feel upset about this, but I don't know how to say it to you in a way that is respectful of you in a way in a way that's productive. And, and so I've failed to say what I wanted to say, but I've
Mhm.
explained to her the problem that I'm facing, and she's
Yeah.
like, and it's almost as good as if I did find a way to say it in a way that was
Yeah.
respectful of her. I don't know. That's felt like a breakthrough for me. And again, like we have good communication and stuff, but
Yeah.
like it's been a stopgap measure I've been using.
Oh man, dude, not to I hope not to get too personal, but it's
Yeah.
interesting you say because my wife has been telling me because I've been on edge for reasons, and actually, what's really funny is that might come as a shock to Ben or anyone who knows me,
Yeah.
hearing me being on edge. But she's like, Larry, sometimes I just don't know what to say to you because I don't know what's gonna set you off, like what gets you upset or frustrated. And I'm
Yeah.
like, I'm sitting here, I'm going, well, I don't want you to feel like that, right?
Right.
You know, so it's really interesting to hear you point that out, and then for me
Yeah.
going like, actually, no, that does actually work because it kind of sets you in a different frame of mind
Right.
whenever
Well, and the
someone's
truth
able to call
is,
that out.
and the truth is, it's probably not some trigger word that she's saying that's upsetting you. It's that there's something going on inside you that you just don't know how to
Mhm.
express. And
Yeah,
so it
yeah, yeah,
doesn't even have anything to do with that. Yeah, so you got to find some way to talk about that. I don't know, man. I need to go to a therapist or something and dig into that one. That was
dude. Yeah,
that's a deep one.
that's it. Yep.
Something that I admire about you, Larry, and it's something that I've been trying to do more as a person, is when I don't know something about, or I don't know everything about a certain topic, or I'm not very well versed in a certain topic, I'll try to admit that in a clear tone. Like I'll be like, I don't know enough about this to have like an opinion about it, or I don't have enough about this to argue against you or with you, but I feel like this. And I think
Yeah.
that's something that's important because so many people online these days will state their opinions as fact without having any sort of corroborating evidence or having any sort of backup behind it, just because that's how people have been trained to do it. It's sort of like people have honed in where if you make a mistake in any sort of thing, like you misquote a fact or you misappropriate something, then your argument just like falls apart. You're dead. You're done. And I think that just admitting that you don't have all the answers, because nobody does. Everyone uses the internet constantly to look up everything. It's like if you're having an argument with something online, their fingers are glued to Google. They're constantly searching for every single stat, every single argument. Every single they're looking up and seeing if that argument's been made before and how it was defeated. It's just it's a mess. So taking that first step and saying like, hey, I'm not an expert. I don't know what I'm doing, but
Yeah.
is something that I've been trying to do a lot more recently.
Yeah. You probably learn more that way. Honestly, it allows you to sit back and maybe find something that they might be saying of worth.
It's also an interesting the way of getting someone to sort of not intentionally but argue against themselves, right? Like the idea is if you don't know enough about there's an adage, if you don't know enough about something to explain it simply, then you don't know enough about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I do is to Ben's point is when someone comes to me and starts talking to me about something that I do not know, I actually rely on them for like thoughts or information or whatever. So I'll ask them questions to get them to explain it to me. And sometimes halfway through they're like, "You know what? I don't know." And then we're in the
Mm-hmm.
same boat, right? And then we can have we're like an interesting
Yeah.
conversation based.
Yeah.
Another thing in that line that reminds me of is there's this interesting thing that I picked up. I forget from who at Riot, but it's like if you take something that someone's saying, it's like you could make a straw man of their argument, which is to
Mhm.
create a weaker version of it and tear it down. But the opposite of that is a way more interesting thing where you Iron Man their
Oh,
argument, where you
interesting.
say like you try to make the most compelling argument for them, like and this can be you can do that wrong, right? Where you can kind of like put patronizing and be like, well,
Yeah.
if you were smart, you'd frame it this way, right? You don't do that, but what you do is you go, oh, I get so the argument is this, and you lay it out in as clear a way as you can, if you're able to, right? Um, and it's sort of the same thing as I was saying earlier, is
Mhm.
like restate people what people are saying and to try to get at it, but I think it's a mentality difference, right? Where instead of trying to win an argument, you're trying to come to the strongest possible case for the side that's for the thing that's being communicated to you. Sometimes you'll find that the person goes, actually, yeah, that's basically what I believe, or sometimes they'll go, no, it's different in this way, and then you learn something.
Mm.
um yeah, boy, I don't this is a tangent, but I'm kind of enjoying it. I'm having a good time.
I mean, I'm telling you, that's the point of
That's
this show. You
yeah.
get the
Yeah, yeah.
questions going, and then the tangents are the real meat of the conversation.
Yeah.
I've never heard
Tangenting
of the
back. Oh no,
Iron.
sorry, go ahead, Lee.
Oh, sorry. No, I was like, I've never heard of the Iron Man, like Iron
Iron
Manning
Man.
No, that
something.
was new to me too.
I'm like, that's interesting. Like, now I'm thinking about it. Okay.
It's one way that you can use it actually, and I found this to be persuasive with like stakeholders at Riot, like senior people.
Mm.
I will say I'll do this format. I'll say, now a lot of people would argue that, and then I insert the Iron Man, and I make the strongest possible case for the thing that I don't want to do, right? And it's genuine, right? I
Yeah.
go, a lot of people would argue that this. When you do that, now everyone's listening to you because they go, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then I go, here's the rest of the format. I go, but in my opinion, we should do, instead of X, Y for these reasons, right? And I find that it makes you a more credible person because what it does is it shows that you've done rigorous thinking instead of
Mm.
just that you're making a biased case for like whatever it is you want to, move forward on. Um,
Oh, yeah.
so just
That's
show
an
the Iron
excellent
Man.
point. Yeah.
Yeah, I think if you can see both sides of an argument and explain them well, then you have a much better understanding on why the argument's taking place.
Yeah, totally.
All right, going back to this. This is something we've asked the last few guests because it's been an ongoing event. But how has lockdown
Yeah.
affected communications at Riot?
I think mm, we're able to do our jobs like just the same as before. I think the effects on our like personal lives and like stress and that kind of stuff, I think are still not fully understood. I've been having really strange dreams, every night,
Oh,
Yeah, I saw your
wow.
tweet
Yeah.
about that.
Okay.
stuff like that. Like, does it affect our work? I hope not. I don't, I'd like to say no. There's definitely been a few days. I try to like talk to the people on my team in like a really open way. And like there's been a few days where either I or they were like, hey, I got call fatigue today. Like, can we just not can we just
Yeah.
can I catch up with you later? And I don't know. So I think it's mostly that. I think it's not necessarily good for people to be holed up for a very long stretch of time. I mean, that's putting it,
Yeah.
it's pretty obvious, right? But like, I think jobs are like half of our waking life for a lot of us.
Yeah.
and Riot has a cool campus, and you get to see a lot of people. You get to get lunch with them, and like it feels a little less exciting every day just because of this. And it just is what it is. That's a lot. There are a lot worse complaints that I could have right now. So I'm privileged enough to be able to say, oh, I could be having lunch at work right now. Um, but yeah, that's it. The job itself is totally doable remotely. It's 100%. Like, and the first month actually, I was like, oh, I want to do this forever. This is incredible, right? I was like, yeah, let me out of here. Now I'm really missing that in person connection with people. Honestly, I was like, when you reached out and were like, do you want to do this thing, this podcast? I was like, dude, I just need any kind of human contact. I'd love to talk to anyone. Uh, so yeah, so I'm grateful for you having me on because I'm honestly like I get to talk to coworkers, but it's all, especially what you miss is calls tend to be pretty focused on the thing that you're delivering because everybody's got to get to their next call. You don't get that in hallway person to person
Yeah.
relief. Yeah, so I
Yeah.
miss that stuff, man.
My office tried to encourage that, where they said, and nobody actually did it because of course they didn't. They said if you were to have a conversation like in the kitchen or something, try to have a call on Slack with somebody like in the place of that. Like, and
Right.
the meaning is good there. Like that's a
Yeah.
good sentiment to have.
Sure.
But nobody's gonna call somebody up on Slack and be like, "Hey, how's your snowboarding knee doing?" or
Yeah.
something.
You
'Cause
good, man?
people they're isolated in their holes, and we've gotten to the point where we have a daily stand up at my work, and people are starting to just dread the daily stand up just because it's just the monotony of it. So we're trying
Yeah.
to jazz it up a little bit in different ways, but it's just it's so funny that you mentioned that you're just like, I need just some sort of human interaction to just keep
Yeah.
me going, because I think
You know what
everyone
it is? It's like purposeless interaction. Like
Mhm.
I I need to be able to talk to someone without having anything that I'm getting out of it. Like whether it's
Yeah.
information transfer, and I'm sorry, I'm not saying I'm not getting anything out of this. You know what I mean? But I really don't have any goals. I really did just want to come on and have a conversation with you guys, right? Like there's no like strategic initiative that this lines up into, right? And that's what those kitchen conversations are. You're not like trying to get anything out of people. You're just shooting the shit. Uh yeah, need some more purposeless communication. But a lot of times people are not in the mood from it because they're already so burnt out from being on call for purposeful work
yeah.
that they're doing.
And yeah, it's tough to get somebody to be like, hey, after 8 hours of having meetings all day, you want to sit down and talk about this or that, which is why I was like
Yeah,
very happy that you decided like, hey, I'll take some time, I'll come on the show, we'll talk
yeah,
about
totally, man.
whatever. It was awesome.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, we're very happy to have you on.
Yeah.
Ooh, okay, let's see. So do you have any standout moments from your career that stick in your memory that make you think like, oh, I love doing this job. This is the best part about this job.
Um, there've been a few times at Riot where I got to work on something that felt so meaningful that I cried, and I cry kind of easy, like in movies and stuff. Like Pixar movies always get me, that kind of thing. But like, I got to work with this team on like planning the 10-year anniversary campaign, and it was this team of like such insanely talented people for months on end, and it felt, and that, I mean, of course, we knew that we were going to use it to announce like a ton of Riot's games, right? And so it had this really important kind of, it felt like a mission, right, of like turning Riot from a one game company into a multi game company. Although we weren't the ones doing that, the people making the games are doing that. But you know what I mean, right? Like getting to be a part of that felt really meaningful. And like the day of that, which I think was was it October 15th? I've like maybe I've like blacked out that moment in my mind because it was like so stressful leading up to it. But like the day where we got to deliver that stuff and see like players reacting to it, and in particular, like in the video where we reveal the new games, there's this like kind of moment where it tricks you and you kind of think the show's over because it's like a music video that's concluding, and it shows you a bunch of fast clips of the new games. Um, that was like so incredibly rewarding, and it's something I'll remember for the rest of my life. There's definitely been there's been a few other things like that too. Um, a lot of the ones more recently have been like the people on my team do something really cool, and I just got to help a little bit and like feel super good about it. Like actually, there's a person on my team. Her name's Nikki. She's not super public, but she does like a bunch of editorial stuff for us. Like she really helps organize and like put together like the Riot Police videos that we do, and all of these like videos that are like, I don't know if you've ever seen our Dev Doodles or a lot of the Dev Diary series. Like especially this year, it was like um the season 2020 videos where it would be like somebody from the skins team talking about what we're gonna do. She's the person who makes that happen. She's kind of like editor in chief of League, and like um I forget what exact video it was, but like she had kind of put together like a pretty clear plan for what she wanted the season 2020 videos to do. And honestly it was just like Reddit comments and like player comments, like YouTube comments, like basically reflecting that exact thing that she had hoped would get put across by those videos. And it was like someone, you just seeing someone nailing their job, that felt super satisfying. Like I didn't, and I don't know why, because I didn't do it, it was all her, but like just that she's on my team, I felt so proud of her, right? Like I don't know,
Yeah.
it felt just as good as if I had done it, or maybe even better. I don't know. I feel like I get to work with really smart and talented people, and a lot of times, if you got to help them do something that means something to them, that's like it's like some kind of multiplier effect. It's way more meaningful than just if you did something by yourself that feels good.
Right.
Um, yeah.
I'd like to clarify real quick. I became aware of the Dev Doodles and Dev Diary series after I already named this series, so no copyright infringement intended.
Yeah. No, I mean I don't think we own that branding. It's whatever.
I did not realize how many like communications from devs were named in a similar fashion until
Yeah, totally.
we started doing the show, and then I was like doing some SEO work, and I'm like, oh no, no, it's
I don't know.
it's
It's good.
everywhere.
It looks official. Yeah, it looks like something another major company would put out. So yeah, I think it's good branding.
Yeah.
hasn't negatively impacted us yet. We'll see.
And remember,
but
I'm
those
your
are awesome.
co-host, so really, it's all on you. I'm just gonna
It's true.
throw that out there.
Larry absolves himself of any legal ramifications. It's all on me. But those stories were great to hear. That's pretty much exactly the answer that I was expecting. Something really meaningful coming out of that. And Larry, I'd love to hear. I know I didn't specifically prime this question for you, but I'd love to hear if you had anything in the similar vein.
Something that goes, God, I love my job.
Mm-hmm.
The one that sticks out is not my current role. So, like for people listening that don't know, I'm the producer for the narrative team. I used to be the outsource manager for League, or one of the outsource managers. I covered gameplay, so champions, and help out with metagame systems again. Um, but I think my proudest moment was, or the proudest moments were when we would work with an external artist and we would really work with them to get them up to speed on our not our culture, our style guide and our expectation, and to see the moment where people would go, oh, that's, yeah, it's all right, to, oh damn, that's so cool, like seeing that kickover moment, and then getting to tell them, it's like, yeah, that's our external artist over in China, over in
Yeah.
Russia, over wherever, and they like, that's a freelancer. I'm like, yeah, like aren't they doing, look, they're fucking awesome, aren't they, right? And
Yeah.
being able to help them through that, always made me feel really, really good of going, God, I love doing this. So I think it's that moment. And I think that I'm looking forward to, and I tangent, there's a concept artist that I helped onboard, who is actually a rioter, like freelancer. He worked on the Mordekaiser update, and he messaged me on Slack like 2 days ago asking a different question totally. I was like, I didn't know you got hired, right? That's so cool, right? Because I had known that was a goal of his. So those kind of moments, knowing that I can potentially help put someone on a path or give someone an opportunity
Yeah.
that that they then run with. Like, I didn't get him his job. I didn't make those people awesome artists. They were already awesome artists. But getting them into that position that they can then, springboard off of and continue to do great things, greater things. I think that's what I really enjoy about my work.
That's awesome. Do you want to say who the artist was, or is that a private thing?
Oh, no, it's Taylor. His name's Taylor Jensen. He did and that's the thing is, I at the time, like, people would come up and be like, "Hey, I have an art friend or art friend. There's a person that that I think would be a good fit." So I wasn't the one who quote unquote discovered him. I was just the one who went, "Oh, okay, yeah, no, that looks good. Here, art leads. Here's some candidates. Here's some background info about them." Like, doing a little bit of investigation, and then them going, "Yeah, let's try them out," and just working with them, getting them onboarded, getting them up to speed. That's all I did. He did the hard work. Like, he was the one who made a cool concept and worked with the team. Really, I was just that bridge, that facility. So there's like a handful of artists, and I do that on my free time too. Anyone who's listening, if you're willing to put the time into it, I'm willing to put the time into it. That's my big thing.
All right.
Cool. I dig that.
That's awesome. And Larry's Twitter is at Riot Legend Larry. He does a lot of art. What's the word?
Promotion.
Where you're
cross posting. What?
Getting the word out about artists and stuff like that.
Oh, I can see
broadcast?
pretty things if I look at your Twitter. Hell yeah.
Yeah.
All right, there you go. That's the pick.
Yeah. I will definitely. There's definitely a lot of art on there. Most of it's game development stuff. Whether it's business or art, like you said. Narrative is something else. Just promoting other people that are doing really really cool work.
Yeah, so make sure to check out his Twitter if you're interested in any of that. We'll plug it at the end of the show again, but he does a lot of cool stuff like that. I think a lot of people have come to
I'm
know
liking
him.
and subscribing right now.
Oh, nice.
A lot of people have
Hit
come to
that
know
bell.
him from his lore series, where he would just go through the wiki and just find a random bit of lore from a champion that may not have been well known, and then just like make a little snippet of it. That's like like I think one of them was like a Mumu was a child of so and so, and then you would just ... and then link the lore piece, which I thought was really interesting because it gets people to go further into the story themselves and get more immersed in the lore. And I think lore is something that a lot of people playing the game don't really get into most of the time. They'll have like a base level of understanding, but if you can just get people to go in and say and have some interest in more of the deep story behind a game like this, then I think that's something that is a worthy goal.
I haven't done that in so long. I've
you
I've
did
let
it
it drop
forever.
off.
So you talked about most of the champs.
I have I guess my thing is I have read every single champion bio and color story available.
Wow.
Like
I've not even done that for sure.
It just I did one a day. That was it. Like one a day. It took me half a year. But yeah, like
Why did you do that? Just out of interest or to know or what?
When I started it, I had just started working with narrative team. That's a whole long story, but I joined the narrative team as their producer, and I went, well, this is something that I want to do and something that I find very important. So I used to be a big lore nerd, and I would read the Journals of Justice, and then they did the retcon. I'm like, okay, I'll come back when they finish that. But that's an ongoing thing. So
yeah,
I was like, well, no time like the present. So I literally just started with A and read every single bio and color story, and then I would
like
tweet.
Universe or whatever.
Yeah, on Universe, and then I would just tweet the fun little fact that I found out, like the one.
Oh, that's cool.
That sticks out is Zach's an empath. Like in his color story, he talks about when he's close to somebody, he can feel what they're feeling.
Interesting.
Zach, the blob dude. Like I was like, huh, that's cool.
I
didn't show up in his kit very well. I don't think.
Nah, not really.
Not yet. Maybe in the rework. No, but the journal. I love that you brought up the Journals of Justice. I remember reading those so long ago. When did those get removed? It was like 20. It must have been like 2014, 2015.
They were up. Let's see here, 2 or 3 years. So like 2012. Is that right? Someone might have to fact check that.
I joined in 2015, and I think they had been gone for a little
Yeah.
while.
Yeah, they used to be. They
Yeah,
used to be on the client. You could like click on the client, and they would be there,
Yeah.
along with a ton of other stuff. There's like a bunch of weird stuff that used to be on the client. But yeah, that's such a throwback. If you ever want to if you've been playing this game for a long time and you ever want a nostalgia trip, just like go back and look at really old videos of like the League client or the League game. It's such a different game now.
Yeah.
Dude, I'd like, you know how they have WoW Classic? Just saying.
Yeah.
Classic.
Right.
Like throw it, like just do the core 40 back on the old map.
Oh, God.
Oh no.
Have
With the
Annie be a
old kits
terrible
and everything.
gremlin.
Yeah, like the
Ugh.
whole thing. All right.
Dude, like I asked once, like, what would it take to do that? Just out of curiosity. And
Yeah.
like the look on the engineer's face was like I mean, it looked like I just killed his whole family. Like he
Oh
was like
no.
he started thinking through like really in specifics, like he was like, oh my god, that system would have to plug into this. He'd be like, and he basically stopped himself. He cut himself short. He was like, it would be the biggest security risk. Like the security flaws that would be like outdated, like all the outdated tech that would all be
Yeah.
like. He's like, no, we'd be like sued by the government, like for exposing players to such a horrifying, pile of code.
Oh man. Oh,
All right.
Yeah.
Let's
Tough.
get to this second to last question that I wrote down here, and this is maybe sort of a downer, but how do you stay positive, and how do you deal with times when the community is upset at a company like Riot?
To me, I used to feel that part of my role was to help keep people from getting mad. I used to like
Mm.
believe that. And like if you look around the industry, like what the perception of like especially community managers, which I never technically was, but like uh the perception is that, right? That like it's their job to manage the emotions of an uh unbelievably massive crowd of people on the internet, right? And at some point in time, first I came to like kind of believe it just in an intuitive way, and now I finally found the words to talk about it, which is that I don't believe that at all. Like I don't think anybody has the responsibility to like manage the emotions of people online, or you shouldn't at least. Like if you've accepted that responsibility, like I feel sorry for you because that's not. I don't think it's really doable. Um, because I think that when people get mad on the internet, it's definitely not on one person to solve. Uh, like sometimes players are mad because there's a thing with the product that should be changed, right?
Mhm.
And I think if you're doing communications, I think it's really just your job to help articulate what they're saying in a way that is like really clear to the people who can make that change, right? If they have the wherewithal to make it. Or so that they can understand like the scope of it and maybe fix it. but but the only thing that's going to calm them down is if that change gets made, right? So it's not really, it takes a whole team to like fix that, right? And then other times people on the internet, like groups of people on the internet get mad, and it's really like performative, like it's a performance. It's like they're using a group kind of action as leverage, as like a form of power to try to get something changed that they would like to have. Like make all the skins free, which is not a real thing that anyone's ever said, but like, I think
Oh,
if people
somebody
thought that
said
they
it.
could get us to do it, they would try, right? And so to try to calm people down would be like it would be I don't know, it would be missing the point. So like I've started to think of my job in a different way that makes me feel a lot better about even when people are mad or whatever. I go, my job is to help. It's to be a bridge, right? It's to help devs understand what is happening, and it's to help players understand what devs are going to do, or what devs are doing, or what devs are thinking about this thing. Like if players are mad about, for a long time we didn't bring picker back as an example, right?
Hmm.
um a long time, and we never did say why. And it always bothered me that we didn't say why. I wanted to say why. The reason was that every time we turned it on, like the player base, it'd be right here, right? It would spike up, and then when we turned it back off, it would be like lower than before. And we have a bunch of theories about why that was, but basically we were like, we didn't really know why. We were just like, dude, every time we turn on Earth, it like kind of kills the player base, like to like a meaningful extent, right? Like it makes people burnt out on the game. We didn't know. We were like speculating, but um and like part of my like understanding of that being a bridge, I pushed for us to take a different approach, which was to communicate that, to let players see it the same way we were seeing it.
Mhm.
And so we did. We put out this post. This was like years ago, where we were like, "Hey, here's the reason we haven't brought pick back Earth in a long time." And what was crazy was because players didn't know it, they had no
Yeah.
idea because they were like they were just like they're not bringing it back because they hate us and it's, or whatever, right? Like they just because in
Yeah.
the absence of an explanation, you come up with whatever the most likely, I guess,
Mm.
explanation is. They were like, so they had no idea, but you would see all this like kind of hilarious speculation of like they're not bringing it back because they think it's more fun than Summoner's Rift, and and they're embarrassed of the making it, right? Like whatever.
Yeah.
They had all these theories. Once we put out the information and like the real reason, everybody was like, "Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, you probably shouldn't kill your own game, huh?" And like not everybody, right? Like there were definitely some people who were like, "Screw that, give me Picker." Um, but it was like it created this bridge. Now we could talk about Earth in a more proactive way. And I think us I don't want to take too much credit because it was like a lot of people that agreed that that was the right thing to do is tell players that. But like it allowed us to. I think the first time we brought back Pick Earth was last year for the 10-year anniversary, right? And we were able to come out and give a really simple reason for it, which is we were like, hey, when you last heard from us, we said that we think this kills the game. We still think that, but who cares? It's the 10-year anniversary, right? And everybody was like, "Yeah, pretty cool." Because I don't know, it was like it enabled us to have a bridge, have a line of communication open that we wouldn't have
Yeah.
otherwise. We might not have even felt like we could have brought it back if we didn't think that we could talk about it in a way like that, right? Um, I'm not even sure what the latest is on Picker. Maybe we found since then that the effect isn't as bad as we thought, or
Right.
whatever. Because we've run it a
Could be
couple times.
temporary. Yeah.
I've heard. All right. I've heard at least one senior leader at Riot say that Picker is Riot's equivalent of the McRib, which the McRib that
I've heard that
McDonald's.
Yeah.
before.
Okay,
Yeah.
I think
this
Jeff said
senior
that.
leader, he referred to it as the McRib, and I was like, oh my god. So that might be the new philosophy. It's the McRib. We just bring it back on a seasonal
Yeah.
basis or to like celebrate certain things. I don't know. I'm not here to make any
Yeah.
announcements about that. I don't even know what I'm talking about. But the point is like whatever it is that we decide to do with it, we'll communicate it now, I think, in a way that's like really straightforward and like understandable. And that'll let the devs feel better about it, let players feel better. Like the end result is that I think people are a lot calmer and a lot cooler about it. But if I had ever approached that, to bring it back to the original point, if I had ever thought that my job is to calm people down, I don't think I would have ever advocated for just telling them that, the reason we're
Yeah.
not bringing it back. Anyway, yeah, that turned into a tangent, but it's one of the ways I think about these things.
Yeah,
Pick
that's
Earth.
awesome. And I just wanted to
McRib
bring an
delicious.
example up
The
of that.
McRib of League.
Real
That's
quick,
what.
the McRib of League. When you guys brought up the data about why Nexus Blitz wasn't actually a very popular game after a certain amount of time, more and
Yeah.
more people were educated. Like, hey, this game was very popular in this circle, but it
Right.
generally didn't have the same level of popularity among all players.
That one's so tough because if you love a thing and then someone comes out
Mhm.
with data that's like, yeah, but not everybody
Not
did.
everybody.
It doesn't. I think that one's. I'm still trying to figure out if I fully understand that one because I thought that it would totally. Everybody be like, all right, cool, later, Nexus Blitz. But actually, the people who really loved it are like, they're not really satisfied with that answer,
Mhm.
And like, I kind of get it. Like, I kind of get it. So that's an interesting one too. I think like sometimes that stuff works, but a lot of times there are people, and it's not even just selfishness. It's just like it's pretty reasonable to be like, hey, but I love the thing. Can I just have it sometimes?
Mhm.
Yeah. I'm still. That being said, I'm still glad that we went out and showed that graph, that infamous graph
Yeah.
that's like Nexus Blitz down here by Twisted Tree Line or whatever.
Yeah.
Because I think if we hadn't done that, then people would have been a lot more people would have been confused, and a lot more people would have been like not understanding it, the situation, the same way that we understand it.
That's.
Yeah.
I want to equate it to something maybe not everyone can relate to, but it's like, man, I eat out a lot, or man, I don't eat out a lot. But then whenever I've had to stay at home, I've noticed I've had a lot more money in my bank account at the end of the month.
Right.
So,
Totally. Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
Just
I'm
saying.
gonna wrap things up because I know
Something
you have
about
to go. One last question, and I've meant to ask this a lot more, but we just end up going on so long that we just run out of time. What is something that you wish more people would ask you about your job?
Oh, that's a good question.
Man, I saw this because you shared some of the questions with me that you're gonna ask, and I never did come up with a good answer on this one because I think, and I tried, man, like I really tried. I actually think that I um talking about my job is fun, but what I like to do is to figure out a new way that my job might be a portal into some new form of learning that I could do. Like, uh, is there some aspect of my job that I haven't even really understood yet that I could, if I could connect it to some other part of the world, could I learn something that's valuable in life? And so I guess the real answer to that question is what do I wish people would ask me? I wish I wish more people had the really weird experience of being a communications person on a video game and that I could talk to them because I'm sure that it connects to all these other things, right? Like this is a really weird field. It's like mass communication. Very few only politicians and big news outlets get to talk to this many people, and
Yeah.
it always just feels like we're just making it up as we go along. And I just would love to talk to more people who have maybe figured out something that I haven't yet because I just want to keep learning about it, because like I said, it's the same thing we were talking about earlier. I just think that almost everyone's bad at it, and it would be good. I would love for someone to ask me something that makes me a little bit better at it. Uh,
Maybe that'll be a future
yeah.
episode. We'll have you back on, and we'll have somebody from another studio on, and we'll have a comms
So
discussion.
resonate.
I'd be
Yeah.
down,
Right.
man. I'd be down. I worry that would just turn into man Reddit, huh?
I was like,
never really
I
get
was
anywhere.
really tempted to bring up Reddit more in these conversation points because
Yeah.
I could talk about Reddit. I mean, we talk about Reddit a lot on this show.
You could. Yeah.
But
It's an
yeah,
interesting thing, man.
Reddit's great. Everyone loves Reddit. Great site.
Read it every day.
Every day.
That's true. I mean,
All right. Hey, thanks Ryan for coming on the show at such short notice. I reached out to Ryan on I think it was either Monday night or Sunday night. And I'm just like, hey, if you want to come on the show, we'd be glad to have you. And he was full on board to get it. So thanks again for
Yeah, man.
coming on at such short notice.
Really appreciate it. This was
awesome to have
fun.
you on.
I really appreciate it. I had a good time, and you guys are great. I'll be a regular listener / viewer.
All right, we got one more,
Right on.
guys.
Yes.
Hell yeah, buddy.
Yes.
Ryan's Twitter is at @RKRigney. Follow him if you're not already. He tweets a lot of interesting stuff about communications and just a bunch of topical stuff in general. Great guy to follow on Twitter. I've been following him for as long as I've known he's been around. If you haven't figured it out yet, we stream Dev Dive live on twitch.tv/Nighthawk20000. So catch it here live. I think the schedule we're trying to go for is once every other Wednesday. Not set in stone yet. So just follow the stream. I'll make announcements about it on my Twitter or Discord or wherever. You'll find it. If you can't catch it live and you want to watch the YouTube video, it's on youtube.com/Nighthawk20000. I upload them pretty much immediately after we end the show, so they're up really quickly. And then if you don't want to watch it and you can't catch it live, you can listen to it on Spotify, iTunes, so and so. And if you want to listen or you want to leave us a review or follow the show on there, that helps us out a lot as well. And I actually wanted to thank one person specifically, Jim Infested. He's been going through every YouTube video that I've put out over the last 2 years and just leaving nice comments on them and being like, hey, this is great.
Jim.
So
That's
thanks,
awesome.
Jim Infested.
What a sweet
I think you were the
person.
first person that I don't personally know to go through and watch all the podcasts. So appreciate you.
That's sick.
Maybe
And all right,
we
hey.
should have him on the show.
Yeah, right.
Stretch
What do you
goal.
do, Jim?
Power
All right. Thanks again for coming out, everyone. Appreciate everyone who came out live. Appreciate everyone who's listening on YouTube or Spotify or anything. You guys are awesome. Take care and see you guys next episode.
Goodbye.